everyone. So I'm just as Cam said, this is what I wish someone had told me before going multi-account. I work at Twilio. I'm the manager of cloud security. I haven't made it to that next level yet. So unless you're going to be giving me a raise, mate, gonna have to wait for that. So what I wish someone had told me before going multi-account. And so what this presentation really is what I wanted to have seen about three and a half years ago when I started the multi-account journey at Twilio. For the most part, I'm going to cover AWS. There might be a couple mentions of GCP and Azure there, but it'll mostly be focused on AWS. The absence of this talk three and a half years ago meant that I had to gather all these learnings the hard way. And that meant doing it wrong. It meant screwing it up. But I do it anyway because I want to come and share all this knowledge that I've now gained with you. So before I start, let me say this talk is not going to cover some things, right? It is not just me setting expectations low so that way I can blow past them. It is a huge topic. Multi-account means many different things to many different people. And there's no way that I could get all of it in one 45-minute slot. And I can tell you that this is not going to make you not make mistakes because you were going to screw things up. You're going to do the things differently to me. But please share your stories of what you've done and what you've learned. We're also going to cover some things like why you might already be multi-account, organizational arguments to go multi-account, and more importantly, which of those work. And we're going to talk about what you do with those accounts. So hopefully you will be pleasantly surprised with this talk. It'll hopefully give you an appreciation for that high art form that is multi-account. There's a lot less science in it than we might all kind of wish. It'll be a collection of advice that you can take with you and start using right away. Well, it's Friday, so maybe Monday, get started with that. And it's also gonna have plenty of anecdotes, pictures, humor, and hopefully we have a good time. So a little about me. In the before times, that's what I look like with a haircut. I'm currently manager of cloud security at Twilio. Again, in the before times, I was a Krav Maga instructor. I am a 2-pizza team all on my own and an AWS solutions architect professional grade, which means I get about 30% more LinkedIn spam than you. When I gave this talk the first time, one of the pieces of feedback was cut the hair, bro. And all I got to say to that is no way, bro. Let's go until the end of the pandemic. All right. So good news, surprise. You might already be multi-account, right? You actually already might even be multi-cloud. Good job, right? Go tell the boss, tell your execs, tell everyone you cracked the secret. And the secret to going multi-account is, or even multi-cloud, just ignore your users and they'll do it for you. So lesson number 1, know what you've got. You could reach out to Amazon and Google and Microsoft and IBM and Heroku and DigitalOcean and Linode and there's all the other ones that exist. Sorry for forgetting you if I don't say you, and ask them and say, hey, like what accounts does my company's email domain or my company's email domains, if you have a number of them, like what do we have? And you're gonna have to go through a whole list of like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 support. You're gonna have to prove ownership over your domain or domains. They're gonna give you the report, which could be anything from an Excel file to a CSV file to a PDF to just an email. There's going to be the sales spam because, hey, if you sign up for our enterprise plan right now, then we can bring you into compliance, etc. You're going to have to reach out to your users who have all these accounts. And then you're going to have to do one of two things. Close the accounts or bring them into your security compliance policies. By the way, if you have Shadow Oracle Cloud, you don't need to worry about it because their legal department will be in touch with you pretty soon. Lesson 1 actually is finance is your friend. And that's because you could just ask them, hey, I want to reduce costs. Let's audit for the expensing of cloud accounts. And then you can reach out to those users because now you know exactly who is expensing what and what cloud provider. and you say, look, there's two options. One of them, we're going to stop paying for this, or two, we're going to require you to bring these cloud accounts into compliance with our security policies. And if they don't pick option two and say, fine, stop paying for them, I'll just keep expensing it on my own. Well, moving company data to a non-corporate owned location, that exfiltration of assets becomes an HR problem very quickly. And at that point, most people opt to bring their accounts into compliance. And some of you are probably thinking, oh, but my users are good, right? They would never do anything as nefarious as shadow IT or shadow cloud accounts. And you've just never interacted with a sufficiently motivated team of people if you think that users would actually not do that. They will always find a way to get their job done. So short story here, right? Rounding up, you have shadow cloud infrastructure. It is out there. You either haven't found it yet, or you already found it and you exterminated it once and it's going to come back. Just like a weed, it's going to keep growing back every time. No matter what you do, there's going to be people who try and spin up some shadow infrastructure. Lesson number 2, why you should go multi-account. Each AWS account is a hard wall that separates it from other AWS accounts. Permissions in one account do not reach into another account. You can obviously get around this and you can change that in different ways, but by default, that's not possible. This gives us the concept of blast radius. So one account, if it is attacked, there's an attacker inside of it, and they detonate it, right? They blow it up and they try and delete everything they can, then that one account is going to be the limit of their reach. They won't get into your other accounts. And this is because IAM is really complicated. I personally have screwed it up and then I found it and I fixed it. AWS has screwed this up too, and they have found it and fixed it very quickly. And so that's how I know that either you at home have screwed it up or you will screw it up. And hopefully you'll find it and fix it before it becomes a company-ending problem. If you don't have any recollection of ever messing up an IAM policy, you just haven't been clouding long enough. Eventually, it will happen. Was formerly a company known as Codespaces. They had a problem. An attacker got into their account, and the company went out of business less than a day afterwards. So since I was just talking about IAM and how complicated it is, a real quick primer if you aren't familiar. Stands for Identity and Access Management. Everyone has something similar. In AWS, there's 3 sort of overarching primitives, which are the principles, the policies, and the resources. Now, the principles are like your nouns. That's a user, a group, a role. You can have a S3 bucket or Lambda function that a policy is directly attached to. And then you have those policies, which is kind of like the verbs. That's what a principle is allowed to do, or what a principle allows a resource to do to it. So that's where your S3 bucket policy is a policy attached to a resource that names which principles can operate on that bucket. And so the easy way to think about this is through dogs and IAMs, right? IAMS, if you think this was just a time to get a cute dog picture in there and I throw a joke about IAMS, you're right. See, you attach the policy to the principle. Okay, so moving along. Permission grants are per account and per principal within each of those accounts. So my 2 users here in 2 different accounts or 3 different accounts can have 2 different sets of permissions granted to them. In this case, right, the German Shepherd security dog here has got 2 different sets of permissions in those 2 different accounts, different permissions. But you can also have multiple roles within an account that you're able to assume. And each of these roles can have different permissions attached. So in this 3rd account over here, the security dog has multiple permissions that are all stacked up and applied to that role. Now you could assume either role that you want, depends on configuration. We'll get into that a little bit later. So now that we have a good understanding of IAM, I want to focus on blast radius. Never put more than you're willing to have compromised at once in a single account. You can subvert this. You can find ways to share and link multiple accounts together, but this gets very dangerous very quickly. Once upon a time in a past life, I found a Jenkins server, which is basically vulnerabilities as a service, and it was doing deployments to AWS accounts. This Jenkins server had a dozen API keys and secret keys to other AWS accounts. And that meant that I was able to, from compromising that one server in one account, I had admin permissions in a dozen other accounts. Didn't need any authentication, just rocked up and owned them all. This is really dangerous. It's having all of your eggs in one basket, right? Aren't these eggs super adorable, right? But they're all in one spot. They are one mistaken IAM policy grant away from disaster, being fried up, right? The eggs can get broken. This is, well, bad. And don't make presentations while you're hungry. Don't have all your eggs in one basket. Okay, so why everyone else should go multi-account? Because all that stuff I talked about, right? Don't have all your eggs in one basket, blast radius, stuff like that. That makes sense to people like me, and I'm hoping some of you out there, security people. Maybe you've interacted with some of us, right? We're the sort of people that the stereotype is on those stock photo websites look like this, right? White guy, beard, wearing sunglasses in a dark room, looking at a laptop screen, okay? Hackers. I bet these people have tattoos. That is the kind of visible, that's what the stereotype is, right? This guy's such a great hacker that he's able to read his code after it's been mirrored in his sunglasses. He looks like he's programming some cute zoo game. Look, non-security people don't care about security arguments. Flat out. It's not bad. It's not wrong. I've made a bunch of security arguments to a bunch of non-security people, and it gets me things like, oh, very interesting. Or, oh, that's a good idea. Or, oh, we'll take that into consideration. But you know what happens? No action. And that's because you're speaking different languages. Okay, not security people and security people don't speak the same language usually. Business people speak the language of money. And you have to make a more compelling argument for going multi-account than, but security. For some really good information on this, you can see a talk given by Ariana Willett, one of my coworkers, a couple of years ago, moving security from cost center to revenue generator. And it's all about how you address the fact that you speak a different language to the rest of the business than they speak, you speak a different language from the rest of the business. They speak money, and if you want them to understand you, you got to learn how to speak money too. Because when you say things like, it's good for security, well, what they all hear is, hey, this is bad for everyone else. When you say this will reduce or eliminate security blockers, what they're going to hear is instead, oh, our devs are going to spend a lot less time waiting and more time developing. They're going to do the things that we pay them for. And when you say things like it's best practice to be multi-account, everyone else is hearing, oh yeah, our architecture sucks. Well, here, you know what? You take a bunch of reasons why your so-called best practices for multi-account don't apply. And you know what? They might actually be right. That was a really hard lesson for me to learn, was realizing that making this argument and saying it's best practice, this is how we should do architecture. There are a lot of really good reasons why things are done the way they are. And you have to keep that in mind. We'll get to those in a little bit. And yeah, the speed of light does make an appearance. But let's talk about some more good reasons to go multi-account. If you have a small grouping per account, a finance group per account, then you can figure out the spend per finance group. That per team billing is ideal. It makes things super easy because then multiple accounts can belong to a team. There's no rule that says that you can only have one account. Like, they're free, just get them. And then it makes calculating your AWS bill and your spend a really simple addition. Remember lesson number 1, finance is your friend. This helps keep them your friend. Shared accounts also have more problems, like who's going to pay for what. Okay, because what happens is, we have one ELB and we got 2 listeners on it, and really 80% of the traffic goes through your listener and 20% of it goes through my listener. So like, I should only pay 20% of the bill for that ELB. Okay, like that gets really complicated. You're never going to make everyone happy, right? You just want to split things and say, done. And so smaller accounts are a lot easier to accommodate than larger accounts. And if you have to err in one direction or another, err in the direction of having a smaller account. It's so easy to make an account bigger. It is so hard to make an account smaller. It's going to be like, well, who gets the cat in the divorce, right? You have the cat, you can't split it apart. Trying to split up an AWS account is about as hard as splitting up a cat. If you start small, right? If you each get your own kitten, then it's very easy to calculate how to split up the costs. So lesson number 4, the cloud is infinite until it's not. So there's 3 kinds of limits in AWS. The first one is a soft limit, right? You open a ticket to get an increase. Hey, I want some more S3 buckets. Okay, here you go. Here's some more S3 buckets. It's the soft limits are like the things that keep you from getting in trouble with yourself, right? That way you don't spend too much, do something too wrong. The hard limit, you have to open up a product feature request to get an increase. Hey, I want 1,000 S3 buckets. And Amazon comes back and says, well, we've met about it in our council of elders, and we've decided you can have at most 300 S3 buckets per account. Okay, well, then open up a feature request and convince the S3 team that they should support your use case. And finally, there are physical limits, right? This is where you have to deal with the physics model of the universe to deal with changing those. And you don't have a whole lot of luck fixing that, by the way. So for example, data uploads from Virginia to Sydney cannot have their latency decreased below the speed of light. A lot of the cloud vendors like to bill you on this whole, the cloud is infinite kind of a thing, right? You can go anywhere, you can do anything. And that is absolutely true until you're flying through those clouds and you hit a wall just hanging up there. But multi-account can help with this too, because those limits are per account. If you want 1,000 S3 buckets, then open up 100 accounts. Each of them has 10 buckets. There's your 1,000 buckets. Do you need more Lambdas, more security groups, more IAM roles, more KMS throughput? All of these things let you scale horizontally. And that is a really convincing argument. Because when security shows up and says, hey, I want us to have less things in an account, right? The business here is, wait, less things in an account, that means less money. If you go to the business and say, hey, I want us to have more accounts that we can put more things in, now the business hears, oh, wait a second, we can have more things, more is going to get us more money. That's really useful. Hey, thanks, security. And you got to remember that there's still physical limits, right? Even though these accounts will let you scale horizontally, there is a limit to that. You can't have more than however many C5.x larges exist in that region. Like you can't get more than what exists out there. Some of these, all these are hardware backed at some point, but some of them are more hardware backed than others. For example, like KMS, right? There is some HSM or magic fairies or however that works to do the encryption. And at some point, you can't get more throughput by having more accounts. But you can get around the hard and the soft limits by having more of the accounts. Okay, so great. How many accounts should I have? Well, now that I've said, hey, you should split things up to get a whole lot of them, there are actually some things that you shouldn't split up because it's really tempting. And absolutely, you should split accounts up as much as you can for cost accounting and blast radius and scaling concerns. And the fact that it makes things easy to understand who owns what and where to, but look, some things, it's not worth it. And especially your architecture might prevent it from even happening. Plus, it also just gets more complicated. The more accounts you have, the more connections you need to make, the more stuff that's all linked together. It's going to take a lot of capacity mentally to remember how that all works. Let me give you an example from Twilio about why your architecture might prevent it. So we are constantly fighting the speed of light. At the speed of light, going from New York to Paris takes about 20 milliseconds. Can't go any faster than that. Light traveling through glass moves about 30% slower, so 26 milliseconds. With networking equipment and imperfectly straight transmission in a fiber optic line and all the other stuff that happens, like 30 to 40 milliseconds lag between New York and Paris is pretty good. But let's talk about physics for a sec, okay? The ATSC, Advanced Television Systems Committee, or the boffins who make your TV work, they have information about when AV synchronization is undetectable, detectable, and unacceptable. So they're the ones who say, hey, like, this is the range that things have to fit into. And you can get around this by saying, for example, audio-only communication is okay with 200 milliseconds of latency. So if we look at this, and for us at Twilio, where we're doing communications and making phone calls, New York to Paris, we've got 80 milliseconds. That's not too bad. We have a 120 millisecond time budget to dig into before that phone call becomes unacceptable to use. But also, you got to remember that it's not just 80 milliseconds round trip point to point. You also have to take the time to go from your handset, from your phone, from your computer, through your ISP to get to those big core fiber backbone networks to get it all the way to the other side of the world, where the same process is going to repeat from backbone network to ISP to handset and back. So 80 milliseconds starts to look a little thin. You got, hard max starts dropping down. And if you come in and start saying, well, yeah, now we want to do video, right? Like this video communication right here. If my words and my image start to drift, right? By 25 milliseconds, like that is already pretty much at the point of, that one-way communication is going to be a problem. So a lot of Twilio, because we're so synchronous, we have to be very aware of how far apart systems are and whether or not it's going to be okay to have things even in a different VPC, a different account, because the time it would take that system to do a lookup and a query and send the packets to the next system, if it's outside of that account, may incur too much unacceptable latency. It may just not be possible to have more accounts, putting more stuff in this flow. Okay, so now that I've said it's really hard to wire it all together and why we at Twilio have some interesting challenges with that, how should you wire it all together? Because assuming your latency budget is more forgiving or you don't care as much about the speed of light between cities, there is a number of ways for these services to all interconnect. In fact, Amazon has like the Cheesecake Factory style menu of options for you to connect to. And you can, for example, add inbound from the world to your security groups, which you're possibly laughing at home about. But seriously, think about it. If you have public files and a CloudFront distribution and that S3 bucket, and you want it open to the world, just put that in its own account, right? You can say everyone in the world can talk to and grab these public files. And then you also know that your other account with your sensitive company information stays separate with no security group that's open to the world. There are a lot of other options available to you to connect all these services together, and they all have different benefits and drawbacks. So for example, Envoy gets a lot of talk. VPC peering is one of the older ways of connecting all these things together. You can use STS assume role to connect to different AWS services that are in different parts or different accounts. You can use a ton of different services, but also each and every one of them has some problems. DNS, right? Like DNS is the perfect example of the hard problems in computer science. It is cache invalidation and naming things, and neither of them is ever going to go as smoothly as you'd like. You could use Envoy, but that means you're running it yourself. It's not interoperable with, it is interoperable, but it's not an AWS managed service. So then you could use maybe the Amazon managed service version, but if you're multi-cloud, then that's probably not going to work. You could use S3 bucket policies, but that only works on S3. I mean, there's so many different options here and more. This is all taken from the Amazon networking products page. So many different ways to connect it together. So here's how the internet's actually connected together. This is a friend's apartment building's networking closet. And that is like literally the internet all connected up in the hallway there in a poorly secured, unlocked door. So I don't recommend, by the way, the unlocked door, but there are pros and cons to all of the different options that I just listed. And that's especially dependent on how much history you have. Twilio is a 12-year-old company. We started before IAM was a service offering from Amazon. This is a long time. We have a lot of decisions that were made a long time ago. A lot of these newer services, frankly, aren't built for us. They're built for people who are just starting, who are playing around, who can leverage their capability and their power to build new and great things. Personally, no matter what size we're talking about or how much history, I'm partial to private link for your network-based traffic and assume role calls to connect to AWS resources and other accounts. It gives you a really clean separation between what is network traffic and what is AWS API calls. It's got decent speed and latency. It's really flexible, but there are limits to it. You have to do testing and migrations to figure out what's going to work for you at your organization. Old slide, sorry. So let's talk about humans in the loop, okay? So assume role calls are a great place to build from, right? You can allow automation to gain API access to other accounts. So where you say STS assume role, I need access, and if the trust policy is all met, external ID, which you should not forget is all there, then perfect. And when you get down to it, honestly, humans are just a collection of microservices with a lot of bugs, super high latency, and I think we can all agree, generally poor taste in music. And they're also all going to need a way to access your AWS accounts. And you could say to me, but we terraform everything. We use CloudFormation. Everything is scripted. It's all done automatically. Oh, really? I would love to know what your CloudFormation template is for incident response. How do you troubleshoot your infrastructure as a code? And by the way, if you aren't doing infrastructure as code, then you should. It makes a lot of things a lot easier. You can detect a lot of stuff beforehand, but there's things that don't have CloudFormation support. So you're gonna have to solve this problem. And you can say, humans suck, don't get their grubby meat hands all over the beautiful cloud, but guess what? They are gonna find a reason to get their dirty meat hands all over the nice clean cloud. So accept it. Don't say no, say yes. And here's how we're gonna handle it. There are a lot of options. The best one kind of depends on your identity provider and how cloud agnostic you need to be, how granular you want to end up making things. There's, SAML is pretty much a standard, stuff like Okta and Shibboleth can handle that. AWS single sign-on, which is like SAML, but more managed and fancy for Amazon things. You can even use like Azure as your identity provider for AWS single sign-on or something like that. There's like, okay. The point is there's a lot of different ways of connecting this stuff all together. You can have a mess of users and assume role calls. That works too, but it's complicated. AWS Okta used to be a software product from Segment that worked really well, but it's depreciated now. So all I can say is keep in mind when you are building this system out, keep Mjolnir in mind. If you don't know, Mjolnir is Thor's hammer. Okay, whatever solution you pick, doesn't matter. Make sure you can choose from multiple roles in a single AWS account. Because even if you have admin access to an account, like legitimately, you are allowed to be an administrator here. You shouldn't need your whole Thor's hammer of power, the ability to destroy the entire AWS account, if you're just trying to see what the instance ID was, or if you fat fingered the name of that S3 bucket, which I've done many a time, right? You don't need the superpowers to go in and do paperwork. This isn't a new concept. This is actually the exact same concept as sudo on your laptop. You have your normal level of user permissioning, but then there are some times when you say, hey, I need to become the super user. And so you pass an auth check and you get your super user powers and you're in. You do what you need to do. And then you drop those permissions when you don't need them anymore. At least, when you're building this out, have a read-only role to go along with your write role. Even if it's just admin and read-only, you're giving developers, you are empowering them to pick the one that they need. And most of the time, they're just going to need that read-only stuff. Lesson number 8, AWS organizations giveth and it taketh away. So organizations, by the way, is way better than the bad old days of doing multi-account in AWS. This is no complaints at the organizations team. They're working hard on fixing a lot of this stuff, but it's just, we're not in the bad old days anymore. We're in the bad new days. So some things to be aware of, avoid moving accounts between organization routes whenever possible. It is, unless it has been fixed very recently, I will caveat it with that, it is miserable. You have to detach and add information so that way the account is separate so it can join an invitation to another account. Even if it's going to be on its own for just seconds, it still has to be set up to last as an isolated account. It is not fun. But organizations gives you some really awesome controls. It gives you the ability to push from the top down CloudTrail and guard duty and service control policies in such a way that those accounts within that are the members of the organization, that they just absolutely can't change, even if you log in as the root user. So there is a caveat to that, though. Don't keep those things like CloudTrail and guard duty findings in your root account. SCPs do have to be in your root account, but you want to make sure that you are doing as little as possible in that main account. I will, just as a quick note, so AWS uses root member and master member pretty interchangeably. So I'm going to generally stick with saying the root part of the organization versus master, unless quoting from the documentation, like right here, which says the organization master can be the delegated administrator, but this is not recommended. And that's because of the principle of least privilege. So if you go and you set up guard duty, Amazon is telling you directly in their documentation, look, you can do this, but please don't. It's not the right way to do it. On the other hand, if you go and look at the AWS Firewall Manager Developer Guide, it's going to start out and it's going to tell you that it must be associated with the master account of your org. Oh, or a member account that's got the right permissions. It must be the master, but it's cool if it's another one that's set up right. And if you keep reading too, if you try and use the Firewall Manager service with something that's not the organization's master account, don't worry, because Firewall Manager will set up the appropriate permissions for you. So there's some confusion out there, but in general, you want to try not to use the root organization account. It's just like using the root user account in AWS. And by the way, don't log in as the root user to your AWS accounts. And especially don't use the root user in the root organization account either. I'm sorry if all the roots are confusing. And if you are doing those things, like if you are logging into your organization root as the root user, stop right now. This presentation is being recorded. Go fix that first, come back, start watching, and after you have fixed that problem. Okay, so speaking of roots, right? Treat root credentials like root vegetables. Roast them. Like I said, got to be careful making slides while hungry. So let's talk about lesson number 10, because you're going to need some bigger email filters. In fact, you're going to get a lot of email. It's important to know that organization member accounts can have their passwords reset via email only. And so if you set up a mailing list for those root accounts, so that way you know if someone is trying to log in as the root user to one of your member AWS accounts, then you're going to get all the marketing spam that comes out for all of those AWS accounts. Just heads up, get ready for that. All right. So now you're probably wondering, well, what goes where? Okay, I've set up my email filters. I'm ready to go multi-account. What should I do? Easy wins. Put Route 53 into a different account. Your KMS encryption keys, different account. Backups, well, honestly, they're not backups unless they're in a different account and it's only a one-way write. And also the one-way write doesn't just keep overwriting. Those are some really simple, easy wins to separate your resources from the places that are going to be utilizing them to make things a little bit safer. That way your DNS entries and your KMS keys aren't contained in the same blast radius as your compute infrastructure. But hey, like I mentioned, Twilio has been around for a while, right? Over a decade. We have a lot of history. What do you do with existing accounts? So assuming you can't burn it all down and start fresh, which I've suggested, and sometimes my coworkers will agree with me, but assuming you can't, the way that you move forward is start a new organization root account and either move things under that or depreciate things in your old organization. Do not repurpose existing accounts for organization roots, right? See slide 38. Don't use the root org accounts. The new don't use your root account. If you have an existing account and it's doing stuff, it's not an organization root. Make a new account for that. Because you want to have as little as possible in the root account as possible. And then the other thing is sometimes you're going to run into problems, right? The console doesn't let you use a KMS key from a different account. It doesn't know about those sorts of things. Well, file feature requests. Hey, this is Amazon listens to the voice of the customer. So be the voice of the customer. Give that feedback. Say what you need to make this work for you. We have some AWS accounts with just KMS keys or just S3 buckets, and we don't allow, by policy, compute. And that means that it's works really well for keeping that data safe and secure and separated. But at the same time, it can sometimes be a little troublesome because you have to either use the APIs or the CLI to do things that you're used to doing in the console. So let me give an example here to try and make this a little bit real, because we can do these assume role calls easily with custom code. So here we have EC2, S3, and KMS. And I'm going to have my, using the Super Taco service, which is one of my favorite services. I'm going to use an assume role call from my EC2 account to my KMS account and my S3 account. And it's going to get back a set of time-limited credentials. From there, my EC2 instance is going to be able to take an object, encrypt it with a KMS key, and upload it to the S3 bucket. Then later, a different account with EC2 in it can go ahead and make a request to download objects out of that S3 bucket. Now, if it doesn't do the STS stuff first, it's going to get a 403 forbidden back. So make the call again to the Super Taco service, get those KMS keys, get credentials for the KMS keys, and do a get to get the object and decrypt it. Why would I do this? Well, if I have a public portion of my company that needs to accept user data, I want that public intake portion to be in its own separate account, far away from everything else, because it's going to be talked to by the public. And I want it to be able to only encrypt and put data into S3. That way, if it gets popped, it can't read what anyone else is doing. All it's going to be able to do is just throw more stuff blindly into the S3 bucket. On the other side, in an internal account that doesn't see public traffic, that service can only do decrypts and gets from S3. And now that service is going to be much safer because it's not going to be dealing with arbitrary data. If it gets popped, then it can't overwrite anything in that bucket. And we've done this all by separating out which account holds which piece of infrastructure. So now, even if you put something somewhere else, even if you need more S3 buckets, you do that with the same code you already have. They just assume a role into a different account. The other thing this helps with is monitoring. Your signal to noise ratio is so beautifully clean, because if there's fewer things in an account and that account has a single purpose, then it makes it a lot easier to profile, right? That KMS only account we were just talking about, imagine that there's an alarm in that account every time anyone tries to, in CloudTrail, you see a create user, launch instance, describe S3, anything that is not KMS related, then hit the big red button, wake up the incident responders, somebody's found a way to make queries against that account. Same thing with your S3 account or your EC2 account, right? This gives you a great filter for what is happening and what should be happening, and cut out all the noise. All right, let's start wrapping up. In conclusion here, you have to make good business arguments for why you should have multiple AWS accounts. Okay, you got to speak the same language as the rest of the business, and that's money. If you can't speak in that language, then no one's going to listen to you because they don't understand you. Sprinkle your resources out across accounts like Santa Claus hands out presents, especially this year. Christmas morning, everyone is going to be opening up presents in their own homes. All right, give them presents, give them AWS services, give them toys, have fun, but you're doing it within your own home. Let users into accounts. Let them into your AWS accounts. Don't try and force them out, but don't always let them in with all their permissions. Make sure that they keep Thor's hammer of permissions that, hey, all right, if I can be admin, I'm admin all the time. Don't let them do that. Connecting all these things together is going to take testing, and it's going to take time. Make sure you make a plan, you test it, and make sure you have a lot of headroom to grow. Some of these services have very different limits depending on your usage. It's good to know about those before you hit the point where you can't grow anymore and it becomes an emergency. And finally, smaller accounts with a smaller purpose are a lot easier to baseline. If they have a single purpose, they're even easier to know what should or shouldn't be happening. So with that, thank you. This has been a good talk. Hopefully you've all enjoyed it following along at home. Couple quick things. We're hiring. We have a bug bounty program. We do pay in with real dollars. So if you log into BugCrowd and find some stuff, submit to us, please. If you'd like my business card, text AWS Community Day, AWS CD to +1 213-277-4252, and you'll get my business card. And then finally, there should be a link somewhere down below the slide deck for Jitsi for Q&A hanging out afterwards. Thank you very much.